Today in Luther's Kitchen, I'm making pumpkin Pop-Tarts. I'm taking 1.5 sticks of butter and I'm cutting them into small cubes, being very careful not to overheat the butter and trying not to touch it too much. And I'm putting that into a medium-sized bowl so that I can get it combined with 2 cups of all-purpose flour. Now I'm going to add 1/2 cup of granulated sugar, followed by a couple pinches of kosher salt, and either using 2 forks and using the tines to press against the butter and flour, or a pastry cutter, which I think is so spectacularly easy. You want to cut in the butter pieces into the flour. You'll know you've mixed enough when the butter pieces are about the size of green peas and they're covered in flour. Now I'm adding 1 egg to a small bowl that has 2 tablespoons of sour cream. That mixture needs to be whisked really, really well before adding it to the flour butter mixture. This next part's going to get a bit sticky, so you're going to add that to the bowl. Using a spatula or a spoon, you want to incorporate the sour cream and egg into the flour butter. You're going to have to get your hands in there too at some point because this mixture is really crumbly at first, but then it is really sticky. And to be honest, this is much faster and easier in the bowl of a food processor. So if you have a food processor, knock yourself out and do the dough in the food processor. Once you can get the dough to stick to itself, you want to dump it out onto a couple pieces of parchment paper. So I'm splitting the dough in half so I don't have to roll it out as much. Makes it a little easier later on. So I take half the mixture and I'm just kind of mounding it and forming it into a thick disc. Again, this is so much easier in the bowl of a food processor. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the other half of the dough. Then I'm going to cover it with the parchment paper and refrigerate it for about an hour. While the dough is chilling, I'm going to make the pumpkin pie filling. So I'm using pure pumpkin pureed, not canned pumpkin pie filling. And to that, I'm going to put 1 egg yolk, and I'm going to save the egg white because I'm going to use the egg white as my egg wash on top. So separating that egg ever so carefully and adding it to the pumpkin. Also to that, I'm going to put in some pumpkin pie spice, which is typically a collection of 5 spices, cinnamon, ginger, nutmeg, cloves, and sometimes orange peel. And to that, some brown sugar. And my fave, a little bit of mascarpone cheese. Gives it a nice hint of creaminess. Get in there and get all of that well incorporated. Alright, about an hour later, I'm ready to start rolling out the dough. It is now nice and hard, so in the beginning it feels really awkward, but seriously, within seconds, it begins to heat up with your hands and the motion of the rolling pin, and it becomes much easier. In fact, this dough is really sticky, like it's going to be very sticky. So what I typically do is I put another piece of parchment paper on top because a lot of the dough ends up sticking to the rolling pin, and I don't like to put a lot of flour on the surface that I'm rolling dough out. I don't know, I'm not sure why, I just don't. So I like to use the 2 sheets of parchment paper, but you'll see me do it again where I do put some flour on the board and I skip the parchment paper, so you could do it either way. Once it's thin enough, you don't want it too thick because remember, you're doubling this up to make like a pumpkin Pop-Tart. You want to start cutting out your shapes. I'm using these cute little scalloped squares, and I'm doing 2 different sizes, which I will not bake together. But I'm making a little small one that's almost the size of like big ravioli that you buy in the grocery store now or at an Italian restaurant. So I'm making little minis, and then I'm going to make ones that are a little bit larger. Make sure you have a couple of sheet pans lined with parchment paper ready so you can put your shapes on them. And I know it's more work, but please re-roll the dough. Don't throw away the scraps. When you re-roll dough, it's obviously harder because the butter's melted. It's going to be a little stickier, so you may need to put a little more flour. And if it's sticking a lot, you can always put the dough back in the refrigerator and let it firm up which is what I ended up doing after I rolled it out, just so I could get it off the parchment paper. There's that egg white. I'm just putting in a couple of teaspoons of water to make an egg wash. And in a small bowl, I've put a little granulated sugar that I'm gonna add a little spice to. Either pumpkin pie spice or just cinnamon would work. Give it all a good mix. Preheat your oven to 350 degrees. And now we stuff. Now this mixture, if you haven't chilled the mixture, which I would chill it before you start to fill it, because you can see my mixture is a bit loose. Just makes it harder, because when you put the top on, it's gonna wanna ooze out. So if you put the pumpkin mixture in the fridge for a few hours while your dough is chilling, then the mixture firms up and this part is actually a little easier. So once I put a pretty generous but not too generous amount, because I need to leave a border. You see that I've got a border without the filling. That's super important. Dipping my fingers in some water because that's gonna secure the top pieces. And then for extra added insurance, I'm gonna use the tines of a fork to really make sure that the top and the bottom pieces of dough are fused together. Otherwise, you're gonna have a big mess because the pumpkin filling is gonna ooze out onto the baking sheet pan. That's no fun. To help these look really glossy and pretty and turn nice golden brown in the oven, I'm applying that egg white wash. I'm then going to sprinkle on that sugar mixture just to give it a little more sweetness, and it also helps caramelize the sugar in the oven so these look so adorbs. For an easier way to fill the pumpkin Pop-Tarts, you can just put the filling on one side of the dough, like rectangular or circular shape, and fold it over kind of like an empanada. And you want to make sure you're securing the sides with the tines of a fork so you don't get the stuff oozing out. You can make a quick glaze with some confectioner's sugar, a little bit of milk, and some pumpkin pie spice while these are baking in a 350-degree oven for about 25 to 30 minutes, or until the edges are golden brown and the middle is puffed up. When they're fully cool, you can apply the glaze, and you need to eat them fresh. They are spectacular. For this recipe and more, visit myclasscancook.com.